She slid the plate toward me and said, "Babysitters eat in the kitchen." It wasn't loud. She didn't need it to be. The words slid across the linen tablecloth like a cold draft, brushing past the glasses and silverware, cutting straight to me. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because she had no idea whose name was on the deed to the house she was sitting in. The room smelled faintly of rosemary and seared lamb, the kind of scent that clings to the air just long enough to feel intentional. A dozen crystal glasses caught the amber glow of the chandelier, flickering like little golden, watchful eyes. The laughter around me was full-bodied, careless, the kind that ignores the quiet corners of a room. I'd been seated there, down toward the end of the table, half in shadow, half in view, while Vanessa presided from the head like a hostess on the cover of a glossy magazine, the kind who never has to refill a glass because people rush to do it for her. It was Daniel and Vanessa's 10th anniversary, and everything was polished within an inch of its life. The silver was spotless, the napkins folded into perfect little crowns, the music soft enough to make you lean in, as though every conversation were a secret worth telling. And maybe it was, for them. For me, it was just another night of smiling politely, answering questions no one really listened to, and letting the small humiliations stack neatly in a corner of my mind where I kept all the others. When she made the babysitter comment, the table chuckled, like she'd told a clever joke. I watched her lean back in her chair, one manicured hand resting on her wine glass, the other smoothing the silk of her dress. A dress I'd seen arrive last week in a carefully packed box, the price tag still dangling from the zipper. I didn't say a word. Instead, I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and felt for the small brass key. Its edges were smooth from years of use, warm from the heat of my hand. I rolled it between my fingers, slow, like a stone you keep in your palm to remind yourself you're still there. The conversation around me shifted to holiday plans. Someone laughed too loud about skiing in Aspen. Vanessa's voice carried, bright and commanding, like a bell in a quiet street. "Of course. We'll have to make a few changes around here first," she said, flashing that smile, the one that photographs well but never touches her eyes. I glanced at Daniel, my son. He was nodding along, the same way he did when he didn't want trouble. His gaze met mine for a second, just long enough for me to read the flicker there. Embarrassment? Guilt? I couldn't tell. He looked away before I could decide. A server appeared with the next course, setting down plates in front of each guest. Mine came last, almost as an afterthought. The meat glistened under a drizzle of something expensive and complicated. I picked up my fork and let the prongs hover over the food, not because I wasn't hungry, but because my appetite had been replaced with something quieter, heavier. The key was still in my pocket. Across the table, Vanessa was telling a story about the first time she and Daniel met, how she'd been sure from the start that he was going places. I'd heard the story before. I always noticed the part she left out, how that place had been my house. I let my eyes wander past her to the far wall, where a single framed photograph hung. Daniel as a boy, missing his 2 front teeth, standing in the yard holding a pumpkin twice his size. I'd taken that picture, planted that pumpkin, taught him to dig his hands into the soil and feel for the roots. Margaret? My name pulled me back. Vanessa was looking at me, head tilted, that polite predator's smile fixed in place. "You don't mind clearing the kids' plates after this course, do you? They get restless sitting too long." I nodded once. There was no point in answering with words. The room swelled again with chatter, forks clinking against china. I sat still, letting their voices wash over me like background music. In my pocket, my thumb traced the grooves of the key, feeling the tiny imperfections in the metal. And for the first time that evening, I wasn't thinking about where I was sitting or what they thought of me. I was thinking about what was locked and what could be opened if I chose. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the corner. Its pendulum swung steady, unbothered by the noise, ticking away towards something inevitable. Dinner wasn't over, not yet, but neither was I. The morning after the anniversary dinner, I woke before the sun. Old habit. Years of early shifts at the library had trained me to rise quietly, to move like a shadow so as not to disturb anyone else in the house. Upstairs, my little suite smelled faintly of lavender, the sachet I keep in my dresser drawer, and brewed coffee drifting up from the kitchen. I made my bed with the same care I always had, smoothing each corner, fluffing the pillows. There's something about a made bed that says you're still in control, even when the rest of the day doesn't go as planned. When Daniel first brought Vanessa home, I didn't think much about control. I thought about happiness, his and mine. Daniel had been my only child, my late-in-life miracle. His father, my Jim, passed when Daniel was just starting college. We'd been married for 35 years, and in all that time, I'd learned what it meant to make do, to stretch a dollar, to put someone else's needs ahead of your own. It wasn't martyrdom. It was just the rhythm of our life. When Jim's heart gave out, I kept the library job, paid off what was left on the small house we owned, and told myself I'd be fine. But when Daniel got serious with Vanessa, he came to me one night with that voice he used when he was trying to be both a son and a man. "Mom, we found a place, but it's out of reach." I remember the real estate listing spread across my kitchen table. White siding, a deep porch, big yard with a maple tree just begging for a tire swing. I saw the look in his eyes, the same look he had the day he brought home the mutt puppy from the shelter when he was 9, the one we both knew I'd say yes to. I cashed out a good part of my savings, the nest egg I'd built from decades of skipped vacations and side tutoring jobs. We bought that house together, my name alongside his on the deed, not because I didn't trust him, but because he insisted it would keep things simple. It did in a way. I moved into the upstairs suite, the in-law apartment, bright enough in the mornings, cozy at night. I told them it was perfect for me, that I didn't need much. What I didn't say was that I was relieved to still be part of a household. I've never been good with silence. The first year was fine. Vanessa worked long hours at her marketing firm. Daniel was gone even longer at the construction company, and I filled in the gaps. Grocery runs, Sunday roasts, picking the kids up from school when they came along. I've always liked the rhythm of family life. Mornings with scrambled eggs and juice boxes, afternoons folding laundry while the dryer hummed in the background, evenings helping the kids with spelling words at the kitchen table. But somewhere between the 1st and 5th year, the thank yous got shorter. At first, Vanessa would gush to guests about how lucky they were to have me upstairs, like built-in help. Then it shifted, small corrections in front of people. "Actually, Mom, we don't really fry chicken that way anymore." Or, "Oh, Margaret has her little way of doing things." Her smile was always perfect when she said it, her tone sweet enough to hide the sting. "Daniel." Well, Daniel's not a cruel man. He's just conflict avoidant. That's the polite way of saying he'll watch a storm build, as long as it's not raining directly on him. By the 8th year, I started to notice my place in the house shrinking. My name came off the mailbox. The pantry shelves I used for my baking supplies were suddenly reorganized to make room for Vanessa's imported teas. One afternoon, I discovered the Wi-Fi password had changed. "Oh," Vanessa said with a little laugh when I asked. "We had to update it for security." Security, in my own home. I let it pass. I let most things pass. That's what years of keeping the peace does. It makes you believe swallowing the hurt is noble. But then there were the dinners. At first, it was just that I'd be seated at the far end of the table. Then it was, "Oh, Margaret, could you take the kids into the den while we have dessert?" The message was subtle but steady. You're here, but not quite part of it. I told myself I was imagining it, until the night I heard her. I was in the backyard trimming the hydrangeas when Vanessa's voice carried through the open kitchen window. She was on the phone with someone, laughing, confident. Once we refinance, it's ours outright. We'll have the cash to start the boutique, no strings. The clippers paused in my hand, ours outright. She never mentioned me. Never mentioned the agreement Daniel and I signed before he married her. The one that says nothing happens to this house without my consent. The paper tucked in the small locked box upstairs, alongside the original deed. I didn't confront her. Not then. Instead, I went back to trimming, my mind turning the words over like stones. Then came the anniversary dinner. The silk dress, the bright stories, the way she slid that plate toward me and made her babysitter remark as though it were a joke everyone was in on. It landed like a stamp of ownership. Hers, not mine. The morning after, I made coffee and set out 2 mugs, even though it was just me. Habit again. I sat at the small kitchen table in my suite, the one Daniel built from oak back when he still made things with his hands. I traced the wood grain with my finger, thinking about roots, how some grow deep and hold, while others spread just enough to look anchored before they give way. Downstairs, I heard the soft slam of the front door. Vanessa's heels clicked on the walkway as she left for work. Daniel's truck engine turned over and faded down the street. The house went still. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and dried it before returning it to the cabinet. Then I unlocked the drawer where I keep my small metal box. The hinges squeaked just enough to remind me it's been years since I've opened it without a reason. Inside, the deed, folded with careful precision. The notarized co-ownership agreement, receipts for the kitchen renovation, the new roof, the furnace. Things I paid for, things they never asked about. I closed the lid but didn't lock it. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to keep it hidden, because I realized something as I stood there in my quiet little upstairs kitchen. The hum of the fridge, the only sound. I hadn't just been keeping house all these years, I'd been keeping score. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to settle the account. The weeks after the anniversary dinner had a different hum to them. Not louder, just sharper, like a note that lingers in the air long after the music stops. It started with the mailbox. I'd been walking back from the corner, a bundle of mail tucked under my arm when I saw it. Our address in neat black numbers, the names printed below in crisp vinyl letters. Daniel and Vanessa Rhodes. No Margaret, no last name of mine at all. It wasn't vandalism, it wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. Clean, precise, as though someone had peeled my name away with care to make sure no trace was left. I stood there for a moment, the sun warming my shoulders, the cool edge of the envelope stack pressing into my palm. I told myself it was petty to feel a sting over a mailbox, but in that sting was something else, something I'd felt before, in smaller doses. The Wi-Fi password changed again. No note. No quick, "Hey, we had to update it. Here's the new one." I had to ask. Twice. Vanessa laughed the first time. "Oh, Margaret, you still use the computer upstairs? I figured you just read actual books." I do, but that wasn't the point. Then came the kitchen. My shelf, where I kept flour, sugar, the cocoa the grandkids liked for hot chocolate, was rearranged overnight. Imported teas and jars of honey with French labels lined the space now. My tin of cocoa had been shoved to the back, dented. The little things were easy to swallow on their own, but they were stacking, like bricks, walling me into a smaller and smaller corner of the home I'd helped buy. One Saturday, I heard the kids in the backyard. My grandson, Jack, was asking if I'd come play catch. Before I could step outside, Vanessa's voice cut through, light and lilting but with an edge sharp enough to draw blood. "Let Grandma rest, sweetheart. She's not really up for that kind of thing anymore." I'm 68, not 108. I leaned against the wall in the hallway, invisible, listening to the sound of his sneakers fade as he ran off toward the garden. It wasn't about the catch. It was about being cut out quietly, in front of the people I loved most. Daniel noticed, I think. I'd catch him glancing at me across the dinner table sometimes, like he wanted to say something, but he never did. He'd pass me the mashed potatoes, refill my glass, and steer the conversation back to something safe. Safety is a kind of silence, and Daniel has always preferred silence. The real break started with the brunch. Vanessa had decided to host an investors' get-together, her words for the boutique she'd been dreaming up. She spent days arranging flowers, polishing the silver, curating a playlist of acoustic covers that would sound effortlessly expensive. The night before, I'd baked 2 pies, apple and pecan, the way I always do for company. I left them to cool in my upstairs kitchen, planning to bring them down in the morning. When I came down, the pies were gone. I found them on the sideboard in the dining room, both stripped of the simple ceramic plates I'd chosen, replaced with ornate platters from Vanessa's collection. She'd cut perfect tiny slices, arranging them like display items, rather than food anyone might actually eat. "Morning, Margaret," she said brightly, glancing over her shoulder as she adjusted a vase. "I thought we'd style the desserts a little, make them more on-brand." I wanted to ask what brand apple pie was. Instead, I nodded. The guests arrived in a wave of perfume and leather handbags. Investors, friends of investors, people who knew Vanessa from charity events and yoga retreats. I stayed in the kitchen, helping the caterers plate salads and refill carafes. Every time I stepped into the dining room to serve, Vanessa steered the conversation away from me. "This is Margaret. She helps with the kids," she said once to a woman in a sharp cream blazer. "Helps with the kids." By midday, the air in the house felt thick. Laughter floated up from the table, but it was the kind of laughter that kept its arms close, never reaching far enough to include me. And then it happened. One of the investors, an older man with a booming voice, asked who else lived in the house. "Oh, just us and the children," Vanessa said smoothly. "And of course, the babysitter upstairs." The babysitter? She didn't even use my name. The room went quiet for half a beat before someone chuckled, and the chatter picked up again, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, my hands damp from rinsing a serving spoon, my chest tightening. The hum of the refrigerator seemed louder. When the man excused himself to the patio, I caught Daniel's eyes. For a second, I thought he might correct her, say something, acknowledge me. But he looked down at his plate instead. That night, after the guests had gone and the house smelled faintly of champagne and trampled grass, I walked past the dining room. The flowers were wilting already, leaning toward the table like they'd lost the strength to stand tall. I went upstairs without saying goodnight. The next week, the injustice went from subtle to public. It was a Sunday dinner, family only, no investors this time. The kids were loud and restless, spilling milk and giggling over something on Jack's tablet. I'd made roast chicken, the kind Daniel used to ask for on his birthday when he was little. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa set her fork down and sighed. "Margaret, I think it's time we have a talk about boundaries." The table stilled. Even the kids looked up. "What kind of boundaries?" I asked, my voice steady. She folded her hands, tilting her head just slightly. Her "I'm being reasonable" pose. "It's about the space in the house. I've noticed you're in the kitchen a lot during the day, and, well, it makes it harder for me to have my flow when I'm working from home." Daniel shifted in his seat. "Vanessa." "No, it's fine," she said quickly, her eyes never leaving mine. "I just think it might be better if you did most of your cooking upstairs. And maybe limit the times you come down during the day. It's distracting." There it was, not a request. A redrawing of the map, with me shoved further toward the margins. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. "Are you saying I'm not welcome in the kitchen?" I asked. She smiled that thin, careful smile. "Of course not, just in certain hours. I'm sure you understand." The kids glanced between us, sensing the shift in the air. I looked at Daniel. He ran his thumb along the edge of his napkin, avoiding my gaze. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I took a sip of water, set the glass down carefully, and continued eating as though the conversation had never happened. But inside, something was different. The bricks had been stacking for months, maybe years. That night, I felt the wall close in so tightly there was barely any space left to breathe. And in that breathless space, I realized this wasn't about the kitchen. It was about erasing me. I didn't sleep much after that Sunday dinner. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, smooth, polite, telling me when I could and couldn't enter my own kitchen. By midnight, I'd stopped replaying the conversation. I was thinking about the key, the small brass one I'd carried in my pocket at the anniversary dinner, the one that fit more than just the front door. Monday morning was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when everyone's gone and the house exhales. I made coffee upstairs and sat at my little oak table, steam curling in the pale light. And then I pulled the small metal box from my dresser. The hinges squeaked like they always did, but I didn't wince this time. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. The original property deed. The notarized co-ownership agreement Daniel and I signed before he married Vanessa. Receipts, thick, folded proof of the money I poured into this house. The roof, the furnace, the kitchen remodel Vanessa loves to take credit for. Helen's voice echoed in my head from years ago when she'd drawn up the papers for us. If anything happens, Margaret, this gives you full veto power on any sale, refinance, or title change. It's airtight. I'd tucked it away, never imagining I'd use it. That morning, I knew I would. I called Helen. She picked up on the second ring. "You finally ready?" she asked, as though she'd been waiting for this call all along. We met that afternoon at her kitchen table. I slid the documents across to her, the paper cool under my palms. She scanned them, nodding slowly. "It's all still valid. They can't move a cent without your signature, and if they try, we can file an injunction." I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. "I want it on record," I said, "that I'm not consenting to any sale or refinance." Her eyebrows lifted just slightly. "You want to send a message." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. 2 days later, Vanessa announced they were hosting a Sunday brunch for friends and potential partners. Again. I didn't ask why so soon after the last one. I already knew. The refinance wasn't just an idea anymore. They were moving pieces on the board. I spent the week gathering, not just the deed and agreement, but photographs of the house before the renovations, invoices with my name on them, bank transfers for Daniel's down payment. Every night I laid them out on my bed like puzzle pieces, making sure there were no gaps. By Friday, the folder was thick enough to feel like something you could drop on a table and change the air in the room. Sunday came bright and sharp. Vanessa was in full hostess mode, dressed in soft cream, hair perfectly blown out, that fixed smile already in place. The dining table gleamed. The flowers were fresh this time. The scent of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee drifted through the house. Guests arrived in a slow stream. I stayed upstairs until the room below was full. Laughter, clinking glasses, the low hum of polite conversation. When I finally came down, Vanessa glanced at me, then back to her guests, her smile not faltering. I could almost hear her thoughts. Stay quiet. Stay small. I didn't sit. I stood near the far end of the table, my folder in hand. Vanessa was mid-story. Something about the boutique, the freedom she'd have once they refinanced. She gestured with her wine glass, confident in control. That's when I stepped forward and set the folder down in front of her. The sound was soft, but it landed like a stone in a still pond. Conversations faltered. Forks paused mid-air. "What's this?" she asked, smiling too brightly. "Documentation," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried. She laughed lightly, flipping open the cover. The laughter faded when she saw the first page. The deed. My name, right next to Daniel's. "This house," I said, looking not just at her but at everyone in the room, was purchased by Daniel and me. Together, my investment, my signature, and nothing happens to it, no sale, no refinance, without my consent. The color drained from her face. She flipped to the next page, the notarized agreement spelling out my rights in black ink. I went on. I am not giving that consent, and I won't, ever. The room was still. Even the music from the speakers seemed to fade. Daniel's eyes darted between us, panic flickering there. "Mom!" I held up a hand. "I'm not finished." I pulled out the receipts, the roof replacement, the kitchen remodel, the landscaping. I set them on the table one by one, the paper making small, deliberate sounds. These are the things I paid for, things I was never reimbursed for. This house stands the way it does because of me. One of the guests shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared their throat. Vanessa sat perfectly still, one hand on the folder, the other clenched in her lap. Finally, I reached into my pocket and brought out the key, the small brass one, edges smooth from years of use. I held it up where everyone could see. "You may run the parties, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady, "but I own the front door." Silence, thick, heavy, unbroken. Then, like a slow-moving tide, chairs shifted. The guests began murmuring excuses, gathering handbags, setting down half-finished drinks. One woman glanced at me on her way out, her expression unreadable, but not unkind. When the last guest had gone, the house was too quiet. Daniel was the first to speak. "Mom, you blindsided her." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. I reminded her. Vanessa stood then, pushing her chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "You've made your point." Her voice was low, tight. "I hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't answer. I gathered the folder, slid the key back into my pocket, and walked toward the stairs. Halfway up, I paused. "You should be careful," I said without turning around. "When you try to erase people, sometimes they write themselves back in, permanently." And then I kept climbing, the carpet muffling my steps, the weight of the folder solid in my hands. That night, I heard them arguing downstairs. Vanessa's voice sharp and brittle, Daniel's quieter but no less strained. Words like agreement, money, and should have told me floated up through the floorboards. I sat in my upstairs kitchen with a cup of tea, the key warm in my palm. For years, I'd let myself believe keeping the peace was worth the small humiliations, that silence was dignity. But silence can also be surrender. And I was done surrendering. The house felt different after that Sunday, not quieter. Vanessa still moved through the rooms with her pointed heels and clipped voice. But the air had shifted. There was less of that effortless certainty in her stride, like she was suddenly aware of the ground beneath her feet. She stopped hosting. The dining table stayed bare except for a vase of flowers she replaced less often. Packages still arrived for her boutique project, but they were smaller now. The glossy boxes swapped for plain cardboard. I didn't ask. She didn't tell. A week later, I came downstairs for coffee and found Daniel at the counter, his tie hanging loose, hands wrapped around a mug. He looked older than he had at the dinner table that night, like the week had added weight to his shoulders. "She's recalculating," he said after a pause. "Her plans?" He nodded. "Without the refinance, some of it won't happen." I poured myself coffee, letting the steam rise between us. "That's her choice to manage." Daniel's gaze drifted to the floor. "She feels like you embarrassed her." "I showed her the truth," I said quietly. "What she felt is her own to carry." He didn't argue. Vanessa and I crossed paths in the kitchen a few times after that, each exchange stripped down to necessity. One morning, she reached for the cream, just as I did. Our fingers brushed. "Margaret," she said, and for a moment I thought she might apologize. Instead, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'd appreciate it if you stayed out of my office when I'm not home." I met her eyes. "I don't go into rooms I'm not invited into." We stood there a moment longer. the cream carton between us, until she set it down and walked out. The children were the only ones untouched by the shift. Jack still asked me to help with his science projects, and little Emma still curled up on my lap for bedtime stories when she was tired. Vanessa didn't stop them, though she lingered at the doorway more often, watching. One afternoon, I was in the backyard trimming the hydrangeas when Jack came barreling toward me, baseball glove in hand. "Grandma, want to play?" Before I could answer, Vanessa's voice carried from the porch. "Jack, don't bother her, she's busy." He looked between us, hesitant. I set my shears down. "I'm never too busy for catch," I said, and held out my hand for the ball. Vanessa didn't speak, but when I glanced back, she was gone from the doorway. It wasn't revenge I was after. Not really. I'd already said my piece at that brunch table. What I wanted now was peace. Real peace. The kind you don't have to fight for every morning. So I started to redraw my own map. I cooked less for the whole house, more for myself. I walked to the library on Wednesdays and volunteered at the front desk. I planted a small herb garden in the patch of sun outside my upstairs window. I stopped showing up for them in the ways they'd taken for granted. If Vanessa needed someone to pick up the kids from practice, she arranged it herself. If she needed help with the groceries, she carried them in alone. Daniel noticed. One evening, he knocked on my door, leaning against the frame like he used to when he was a boy avoiding chores. "You've been different," he said. "I've been busy," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. His eyes softened. "I think that's good for you." It was. The first tangible crack came 2 months later. I overheard Vanessa on the phone in the living room, her voice low and tight. "No, we can't move forward. The funds aren't there. No, I can't just find another source. It's complicated." A pause. Then, softer. I didn't think she'd actually use it against me. She never saw me at the top of the stairs. That night, after the kids were asleep, I went downstairs with a small envelope. Vanessa was alone at the dining table, scrolling through her laptop, the light casting her face in shadow. I set the envelope in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, wary. "Receipts," I said. "Copies of everything I showed at the brunch, in case you ever need to remember exactly where the lines are." She hesitated, fingers hovering over the flap. "Is this supposed to threaten me?" "No," I said, my voice gentle. "It's so you understand that I won't be erased, and maybe, in time, we can stop seeing each other as opponents." Her eyes flicked up to mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something other than calculation. Maybe it was uncertainty. Maybe it was just exhaustion. "I don't hate you, Margaret," she said finally. "I don't hate you either," I replied, "but I won't live in a house where I'm treated like I don't belong." I turned and walked toward the stairs, not waiting for an answer. The next morning, a small vase of fresh tulips sat on my kitchen table upstairs. No note, no explanation. I didn't read too much into it, but I didn't throw them out either. One Sunday in late spring, I was sitting on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the kids play under the maple tree. Vanessa stepped outside, holding a plate of sliced watermelon. "They were asking for a snack," she said, setting it on the patio table between us. I nodded. "Thank you." We sat there in silence for a while, the children's laughter threading through the warm air. Then, without looking at me, she said, "I know you love this house." "I do," I said. Her fingers tapped the edge of the plate. "I'll respect that." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. That evening, I took the brass key from my pocket and turned it over in my hand. For years, it had been my reminder that I wasn't powerless. Now, it felt less like a weapon and more like proof. I set it on the windowsill above my kitchen sink, where the light could catch it. Not hidden away in a drawer, not clenched in my fist, just there, a part of the house, a part of me. Summer came slow that year, the way it does when you're paying attention. The maple leaves outside my upstairs window grew heavy and full, casting dappled shade over the garden. My hydrangeas bloomed early, big round clusters of blue and white that swayed whenever the breeze caught them just right. The house felt different now, not entirely warm but not cold either, like a truce had settled over the walls. We moved around each other with a little more care, a little more space. Daniel still worked long hours. Vanessa still had her projects, though they seemed smaller in scope now. Craft fairs, online sales, nothing that involved bank loans or whispered investor meetings. The boutique never materialized, but she didn't speak of it anymore. The children came to me as they always had. Emma for bedtime stories, Jack for homework help, and a catch in the yard. No one stopped them. I kept to my boundaries. I cooked in my kitchen, tended my garden, volunteered at the library. I walked into the main house when I wanted to, not when I felt obligated. And when I was there, I stayed present, not shrinking, not bristling, just being. One Saturday morning, Daniel asked if I'd join them for pancakes. It had been years since he'd said something like that. We all sat around the table, the big one downstairs, passing syrup and butter while sunlight spilled across the wood. Vanessa didn't say much, but she poured me coffee without being asked. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. I realized something in those months. You don't have to burn every bridge to walk your own road. You just have to stop letting someone else tell you where it leads. I'd spent years thinking my silence was keeping the peace, when really it was just making me disappear. Speaking up, claiming my place, didn't destroy the family. It showed me which parts were worth keeping and which needed to be set down. Late one afternoon, I was sitting on the back porch when Vanessa stepped outside. She had a small envelope in her hand. "I came across this," she said, offering it to me. Inside was an old photograph. Daniel, about 8 years old, standing in front of his first little league game, his cap crooked, his glove almost bigger than his arm. I'd taken it on a cheap camera, printed it at the drugstore, and written the date on the back in neat librarian script. "You should have it," she said. I looked at her for a moment, trying to read the gesture. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was a kindness. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. She gave a short nod and went back inside. The brass key still sat on my windowsill upstairs, catching the afternoon light. I didn't carry it in my pocket anymore. I didn't need to. Its weight had done its job. It had reminded me that I wasn't powerless. Some days, I'd glance at it while watering the herbs or folding laundry and feel a quiet certainty. I could leave if I wanted, but for now, I chose to stay. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. A few weeks later, the kids were in the yard, running through the sprinkler, their laughter drifting up to my window. Daniel was manning the grill, flipping burgers the way Jim used to. Vanessa was arranging paper plates on the patio table. She caught my eye through the screen door and gave a small wave. I waved back. It struck me then, sometimes the win isn't changing someone else. Sometimes the win is changing yourself, so their power no longer works on you. That night, after the kids had gone to bed and the dishes were done, I stepped outside alone. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of cut grass and charcoal. I looked up at the maple tree, its branches stretching out like open arms against the dark. I thought about all the versions of me that had lived in this house. The helper, the peacekeeper, the woman afraid of making too much noise. And now, finally, the woman who knew she belonged here on her own terms. If you've lived long enough, you learn something about people. Those who try to make you small aren't always evil. Sometimes they're just afraid you'll see how little their power means once you stand up. And you learn something about yourself, too. You don't need to win every battle. You just need to own your ground. The porch light flicked on above me. I turned to go back inside, pausing for one last look at the house. My house. Respect, I thought, isn't a gift you hand out because of blood. It's the rent you pay to live in someone's heart. I went upstairs, the key still glinting in the windowsill, and closed my door. For the first time in years, I didn't lock it.